Welcome back, people, to my bun and cheese reviews. This is a new top 5 of a new label. That label is Republic Records. Now, just like last week with Atlantic Records, I didn't know a lot, so I had to do a lot of research, who was signed, who wasn't signed, as such. And just like last week, if you didn't know some of these artists were signed, Subsidiary Records probably own them, it goes down like that. Kind of like corporations sometimes. But let's stop all the talking, all the nonsense, and get into our honourable mentions. Now, one honourable mention is Akon. I remember being in primary school, that's how old Akon been going back. Listen to Akon, and he was good. Never listened to an album all the way through, but he had some bangers, and so he gets an honourable mention here. I haven't listened to enough, that's why he can't get onto the list. Another honourable mention is Drake. Drake signed to Republic as well, and honestly, I've never got the hype behind Drake. I'd say he's a decent artist, a better artist than he is an actual rapper, but the way people put him on this pedestal, I just think he's pathetic. But he's a decent artist, so I did think he should get an honourable mention here, but he's not on the list as well. So let's stop all the babbling, all the talking. You hear me talking too much, and now you're going to hear me talking too much more, but that's going to be for the top 5. So let's get into the list right now. Number 5, Shawn Mendes. Shawn got popular from posting music videos on Vine in 2013. I just find it crazy that Vine still existed in 2013. Like, I thought that was a thing from that ended in 2009. But anyway, 2 years after this is when he released his debut album, Handwritten. This was a very solid album with him showcasing his skills from the very first song of Life of the Party, with the piano instrumental complementing the tempo of his singing well, and the guitar in I Don't Even Know Your Name doing the exact same thing. The beat picks up on the aftertaste, and so does Shawn's, surprisingly rapping on verses. Again, who would have known? With his lyrics being extremely memorable. But my favourite track on the album, without thought, has to be Stitches. This is one I think has the most replay value. Shawn complements the soft bass of the guitar with extremely emotional lyrics. I remember being slightly disappointed when I found out he didn't actually write this track, but that can be forgiven for how well he performs it. And to think he did all this before the age of 16 proves he was and still is a sensational rising talent, because he's now 21, of course. Number 4, Damian Marley, the son of the legend Bob Marley. And I've always said that I prefer Damian out of the two. That's probably because when it comes to reggae, I prefer the hard gritty stuff over the soft. Unless it's Morgan Freeman, but that's a whole other subject. Morgan Freeman? Morgan Freeman? Morgan Heritage? Morgan Freeman? What am I talking about? I'm going to leave that in there because Morgan Freeman is... I first properly heard of Damian in 2010 when he released a joint album with Nas called Distant Relatives. From the first track on the album, I knew this was going to be special. It was the first time I ever heard 2 different genre artists trade bars on a track, and I thought it worked so well. He starts the verse off for Namin with his rough and straight approach that complemented the beat. Even though I'd say this album was a success as a whole, it still remains the only album of his I've listened to, so I can't put him any higher on this list. Number 3, The Weeknd. Unlike most of the artists I've reviewed up until this point, The Weeknd's debut album isn't the one that I started with when I first started listening to him. I started with Beauty Behind the Madness, which was his sophomore album, and it's instantly made me a big fan. Often has extremely repeatable hook, but Abel, that's his name by the way, if you don't know, Abel, or Abel, whatever you say his name, and you catch yourself singing with it along with him. The Hills has a techno beat where Abel's high-pitched notes on the hook and the bridge shines the brightest. Can't Feel My Face has a very club vibe, and Abel shows his talent with his smart lyrics, tricking most listeners to think it's about a girl. But we know what it's about, really. My favourite track has to be Earned It, which proved to be a big hitter when it featured on the 2015 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack. I love the slow beat and the lyrics on the verses, and the classic high-pitched strung out notes at the start of the hook. Starboy was his next album, and this had many well-made singles such as False Alarm, Sidewalks and Lonely Nights. My two favourites were Rockin' and Ordinary Life, with the former being a classic club banger and the latter incorporating a more slow melody about something that, let's say, is a lot more risky than clubs. Number 2, Amy Winehouse. Now, I say this to everybody I talk to about with Amy Winehouse, is that if she didn't die when she died, R.I.P., she would have become a living legend. She would have been at the highest order of legends. She had amazing talent that you can't take away from her. And I say that by only listening to one album. This album was Back to Black, her second debut album, released in 2006. I remember as soon as I heard her, I thought nobody this young would have this much soul and bass in their voice. It's like musically we went back 2 decades listening to her alone. Rehab is one of, if not her most famous song she made, but I can still think of other tracks on that same album that were just as good as or even better. You Know I'm Not Good has a funky beat with trumpets, and Amy's deep voice complemented them well. Tears Dry on Their Own was slightly more upbeat, and I remember singing the memorable hook with my mum whenever it came on. I should add this album was made from her heartbreak, and you can hear her pain in literally every song that she does. Back to Black is yet another perfect example of this. Here she makes her lyrics as literal as possible. She was a talent I will never forget, and I can't help but think she would have topped this list if she was here now. Number 1, James Morrison. There was a time in my life where James was the main artist I was listening to, and I had all 3 of his first albums on CD, and I pretty much thought he was untouchable, at least among the English pop song singers and writers anyway. His debut album featured the memorable You Give Me Something for its melody, Wonderful World for its well thought out lyrics, and Undiscovered for its inspirational weight to the song. My favourite on the album had to be This Boy, and that's simply because I felt I could personally relate to the lyrics. His second album featured other relatable songs like Please Don't Stop the Rain and Nothing Will Ever Hurt Like You, but my favourite song from here had to be Broken Strings, featuring Nelly Furtado. The best part of the track is a latter hook, where both James and Nelly beautifully share their lyrics, harmonising with each other perfectly. Up on the third album with Jessie J reminds me of a reverse version of Broken Strings, not being as upbeat, but with just as much emotion, and another talented female artist in Jessie to harmonise with on the hook. I think the number 1 spot for him suits him well, especially for how much I've worn out his CDs back in the day. Yo, those were just ground to dust, man. How much I put them in the CD player. That's how old I am. There was a CD player for you young'uns out there, man. You don't know what those are. But that is my top 5 list of Republic records. I'll give you a teaser in what's going to be next week's. It will be the last week of top 5 music records, but it's going to be my favourite record label of all time. One where I shouldn't need to do a lot of research, because I've got that many songs and that many artists I love. But it's going to be hard making a top 5. I won't chicken out to make a top 10. And I'll be surprised if anybody watches this knows what that record label is, because I don't think I say it enough even to my friends. But yes, I will be cutting some names and crying about it to myself when I make the top 5 of next week. So up until then, I suppose. Till next time.